I see no reason why China and the U.S. shouldn't have good relations, why Russia and the U.S. shouldn't have good relations, why everybody shouldn't be treated with respect and with understanding of national interests. I had some contacts with the members of the Washington administration, and I liked the message which they were carrying. I'm not quoting, but in essence, the message was that the foreign policy of the United States is based on national interests of the United States. At the same time, the United States recognizes that other countries also have their national interests. And those interests would never coincide fully, maybe even half of these interests would not be similar. But when the interests, especially the interests of big countries, coincide, it is essential for them to find ways to materialize them into mutually beneficial economic, logistical, and other projects. While when these interests contradict each other, it is the responsibility and duty of countries, especially if we speak about big powers, not to allow these differences to degenerate into confrontation, especially the hot confrontation. And this is something which we absolutely support. We have been acting the same way throughout our history. And the last element of this multipolarity, in our common region, the security issues after World War II have been addressed from the Euro-Atlantic logic. The NATO, of course, EU was European per se, but lately the European Union signed a deal, a treaty with NATO, treaty on agreement, I don't know, but European Union is now part of Euro-Atlantic policies, no doubt about it, including the provision of its territory for NATO plans to move eastward, southward, I don't know where. OSCE was created as an obviously Euro-Atlantic creature, and all of these Euro-Atlantic constructions, I think they failed. They failed to consolidate security and stability. What they succeeded in is igniting tension and remilitarizing Europe, including Germany, in spite of the fact that the economic and social situation is degrading. But all efforts of this Euro-Atlantic community are concentrated on getting ready for a new war. And Germany, together with France and Britain, are in the lead of this. NATO should have been dissolved in the first place after the Soviet Union ceased to exist, after the Warsaw Treaty ceased to exist. And there were voices in the West saying, guys, let's now concentrate on OSCE. Let's give it some push, and let's be all in one organization. NATO, you know, the promises given to Gorbachev, then to Yeltsin, and there are memoirs where some people ask, why didn't you insisted on a written guarantee when Jim Baker said NATO would not move an inch to the west, to the east? My answer, it just occurred to me. You know, in the Russian history, since 17th, 18th century, when the trade was booming, nobody signed any contracts. They shook hands.
Was that word of honor?
They shook hands, the word of honor, and it was never violated. So probably those who were running NATO at the time of we are discussing didn't have any relatives in the former Tsarist Empire, which is not my fault, and did not inherit those traditions. But NATO not only stayed, remained, it was basically announced that this would be the only organization which can guarantee your security. 1999, Istanbul, summit of OSCE, the solemn declaration is adopted, which among other things said, security is equal and indivisible. Everybody, yes, has the right to choose security alliances, but this cannot be done at the expense of diminishing of security of others. Then it was even blunter. when it said, no country, no group of countries, no organizations in the Euro-Atlantic OSCE area can claim dominance. And NATO was doing exactly this. And when Putin came to power, was elected president, he was repeatedly warning about very dangerous nature of this course. 2007 in Munich, if you re-listen it now, it was very far-sighted, unfortunately. Then 2008, NATO summit in Bucharest, which was also followed by Russia-NATO summit. I was there with President Putin. And when it was announced that Germany and France did not allow to pass a decision formally launching negotiating process for Georgia and Ukraine to be admitted to NATO, the Germans and the French were proud. They said, but they included in the declaration the statement that Georgia and Ukraine will be in NATO. When Putin asked Merkel, what is the difference? She said, no, this is just a political statement. And what we managed to avoid was a legal process to be launched. But frankly, it's childish. Because Saakashvili lost his brains a few months after Bucharest, when he ordered the attack of the Russian peacekeepers in South Ossetia, violated the OSCE-endorsed agreement, and so on and so forth. Then, in 2010, in Astana, this was the last summit of OSCE so far, the Istanbul formula was repeated verbatim. No organization can claim dominance, no one strengthens his security at the expense of security of others. And then, when this NATO expansion continued and when it was clear that these principles promulgated in OSCE about equal and indivisible security, that they were not being implemented, then we suggested to have the same language and codify it in a legally binding agreement. We were told, it was during Obama administration, we were told, no, guys, you don't understand. Legally binding guarantees one can only get in NATO. We said, but your president signed this OSCE declaration. They said, this is political statement. Cheating is the key word for what was happening. And our last attempt, but we still in 2008 and 2010 were proposing the draft agreements between Russia and NATO, Russia and the United States. The same we did in 2021 in December. To no avail. So yes, my point is that NATO did not, or rather NATO failed to strengthen security because NATO was manipulated by those who did not want to share security benefits. And they wanted to leave all the benefits for themselves, for others to listen and get instructions. When you come to somebody's region, you should respect the views of the regionals. And host countries, if you wish, and not impose your rules, like our European and British colleagues are running all over the world. It used to be also Biden administration involved in this, running all over the world, saying, don't trade with Russia, don't sell to Russia, don't buy from Russia, don't meet with Russia. I know, because those are the facts. And this is not multipolarity. This is obsession with your global role, which you invented yourself and which worked in my opening remarks. Nothing wrong if the US and Russia have good relations, if US and China have good relations. And what is going on between us and the Trump administration is really a very banal thing. Countries talk to each other without dictating to each other, without asking for any precondition. They just talk to each other. China and the United States, they have many differences. Russia was doctrinated by Biden administration as the immediate threat. China as the long-term biggest challenge to the American dominance. So competition in the world of economy, you see what kind of forms it acquires. And Taiwan, the situation in the Strait of Taiwan, the situation in South China Sea, who is going to have more influence with countries of East, South Asia. And they exchange statements, China and the United States, which are not very pleasant to each other. And when the West, headed by the United States and other Western countries, they say we recognize, we follow one China policy, but they immediately add, but don't even think of touching the status quo. And what is status quo? It is not. It is not one China policy. And from time to time, we hear from Washington the threats to Beijing. Don't even think of using force. This would be catastrophic. So they exchange niceties publicly, but they never stopped talking to each other at the level of foreign ministers, ministers of defense, national security advisors, and presidents. And somehow Biden administration decided that with Russia it should be different. Russia must learn a lesson, and this lesson, this punishment, would be in the form of isolation. Stupid, to put it very politely, and not talking to each other. So Trump, what Trump is suggested is come back to normalcy, to stop this idiotic posture. When we speak about eliminating root causes of any conflict, including Ukrainian conflict, this is the only way to resolve the problem and to establish long-lasting peace. Remove root causes. President Trump was the first and so far, I think, almost the only one among the Western leaders who repeatedly, with conviction, several times stated that it was a huge mistake to pull Ukraine into NATO. And this is one of the root causes which we quoted so many times. They also mention now another thing which related to the root causes, namely territorial issue. Mm-hmm. They publicly, including Steve Witkoff, they recognize that the territorial issues would have to be handled in the context of the long-lasting settlement. And
this is the Americans.
The Americans, yes. And I would like to, by the way, when Ukrainians and the U.S. delegations in Riyadh agreed on some paper in favor of 30-day ceasefire, this was done in the context of the Americans saying NATO and territories inevitable. No NATO and discussion on the status of territories. Ukrainians and the people like Macron, Starmer, and Ursula von der Leyen, now they say Ukraine is in favor and Russia is against the ceasefire. But they lose sight, I think, on purpose, from the nuances, as Putin called them, NATO and territories. Because it is in the context of these aspects that the American proposal was put forward. Immediately after this was mentioned by the Americans, Zelensky administration said, NATO is none of your business. Territories we don't discuss. We need arms, arms, and arms. And then, since it was in time of discussions of this peacekeeping thing, Zelensky said, we don't need peacekeepers, we need fighting units. So the schizophrenia of this mutually exclusive statements is very obvious. But on territories, I want to make a very important point.
Sure.
We are not about territories. We are about people who live on these lands, whose ancestors lived there for centuries, who founded cities like Odessa, Catherine the Great, who built factories, who built roads, ports, and these people, by twist of history during the Soviet days, became not part of Russia, but part of Ukraine, because this was considered a consolidating factor to neutralize the ultra-radicals living in the western part of Ukraine when it joined the Soviet Union after the war. The people who lived there they are being deprived of all human rights. I quoted the UN Charter, which in Article 1 says everybody must respect human rights of every individual, irrespective of race, gender, language, or religion. Religious and language rights of anybody who is ethnic Russian and lives on the territory which used to be Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, they were deprived of their basic rights. The Russian language has been prohibited at all stages of education, in the areas of culture, media. Russian books have been thrown out of the libraries. The Nazis in Germany were burning them, but Ukrainians are much more smart. They utilize them and get money for this, you know. So, but everybody is happy. And recently, the canonic Ukrainian Orthodox Church was prohibited by law. They literally exterminate anything Russian. When in 2021 in September, long before the operation which we had to launch, Zelensky was asked in an interview what he thought, and at that time the Minsk agreement was still valid, though later Germans, the French and the Ukrainian president before Zelensky admitted that they never intended to implement them. They needed more time to arm Ukraine, speaking of the ceasefire for 30 days. Logic is the same. But in September 21, Zelensky was asked what he thought about the people on the other side of the line of contact in Donbass. And he said, trying to sound clever, you know, there are people and there are species. And my advice to those who live with Ukraine but feel associated with the Russian culture, for the sake of your kids, for the sake of your grandchildren, get out to Russia. And just a couple of weeks ago, in another interview, when he was asked what is driving him, you know, he said hatred to Russia. The interviewer wanted to clarify to Putin. He said no to all Russians. And this is said by the person who, during his artistic days, was defending the right of Ukrainians to speak Russian. And he said, get lost. Don't even think about touching the Russian language. It's our history. Never dropped a word about the situation with human rights in Ukraine, then this is not our problem. Okay. We listen to those people who voted at referendum to join Russia to restore all their rights, which belong to them by international law and by history, by justice. The biggest advocates of something like stability force, sustainability force, are Macron and Starmer. And they are not thinking about any neutral force. They say we, Macron and Starmer, would be the countries who would provide the most of the contingent. They talk, by the way, to countries outside European Union, including Turkey. They talk, according to the rumors, they said that they are talking to China, which is a lie. India, Indonesia, they mention. My question is, first, President Trump, who, as I mentioned already, seems to understand much, much, much more about what is going on than any European leader, except I would highlight Hungary and Slovakia. These leaders are quite thoughtful, but it was President Trump who said first many things on NATO, on territories, and he said that when asked about this idea of a contingent, a force, a group, whatever you call it, there should be some discussion between the parties. They say, I think Macron said, no discussion with Russians, Ukraine is a sovereign country, it has the right to invite anybody, and they are inviting us. In brackets, I would repeat what Zelensky said. We don't need peacekeepers, we need fighting units. So make your own conclusion. But Kit Kellogg, by the way, yesterday said that why don't we divide Ukraine like we divided Berlin after World War II? Then he said he was misunderstood, misspoken, but everybody is missing the key point. Imagine, yes, leaders of Brussels bureaucracy, they say, we must reach a deal which at the end of the day must guarantee Ukraine sovereignty. They, by the way, didn't mention territorial integrity, but sovereignty. My question is to them. You mean you want to have peacekeepers to keep the same regime, which is now headed by Zelensky? You don't want to ask this regime whether it would be interested in implementing the international commitments, including UN Charter, regarding the rights of minorities for national minorities, language and religious rights. Nobody is raising the issue. So my conclusion is that by ignoring the gross violation of all the international norms about human beings, by ignoring these norms and violations by Zelensky of these norms, and at the same time by discussing deployment of something military, call it peacekeeping, call it stabilization force, on the remaining part of Ukraine, they want to use this force not to keep peace, but to keep and protect the Nazist regime. And this is key. Everything else is smokescreen. This time, when President Trump suggested another Black Sea deal, Putin said, yeah, we are ready, but we need to draw lessons from the past. And let's make sure before we launch it, let's resolve the things on freight, insurance, calling on the ports. The Americans took this and they are considering, they didn't come back to us after this. Another initiative of President Trump was 30-day moratorium, not a total ceasefire, but 30-day moratorium on attacking energy infrastructure. During this phone conversation, President Putin immediately agreed, and he gave orders to the Chief of General Staff to stop attacking Ukrainian energy infrastructure, even infrastructure related to the military. And at that moment, 7 drones, Russian drones, were airborne. And Putin gave order to shut them down, which was done. Since then, we have been keeping the word, and Ukrainians have been attacking us from the very beginning, every passing day, maybe with 2 or 3 exceptions. And I gave to our colleagues from Turkey, to Minister Fidan, what we give to Americans, to UN, to OSCE, the list of facts, listing the attacks by Ukraine during the last 3 weeks against Russian energy infrastructure. We understand he hates all Russians, so he gives orders. Either he gives orders and they are not taken, or he is lying that he is giving these orders. It's a tragedy.